don't know that I can tell a room full of clergy what to pray for.
That's our language.
Yeah. You know, what worries me is that there are so many interactions every day between the police and members of the community. Thousands, right? Who could even quantify it? Tens of thousands in this state alone.
Right.
And so many of them are handled professionally and well and with dignity and fairness by everybody. But all it takes is one, right? All it takes is one. And sometimes these things can spin out of control, right? And we have a situation in Trenton, you may have read about, where there was a 14-year-old boy who was shot by the police. He was not killed, and he's been charged, the 14-year-old's been charged with firearms possession, and that case is pending. I don't want to say too much about it. But, you know, we needed to do a bunch of meetings with community leaders like this real quickly to ensure the community leaders, and that's why part of the reason we're doing this, so that people know in advance, hey, we have a reliable system in place, and we have a system of independent review in place. And by building trust in our processes, I think we can help protect things from spinning out of control. But, you know, there's just so many of these interactions, and all it takes is one. And if
So
you
it
get
sounds like what worries you the most is things spinning out of control.
Yeah. But I think the more that community leaders understand the way things work and are able to tell the people who they lead, listen, there is a good, fair process in place. Let's let it play out. And we got some of that in Trenton, and that helped quite a bit. That sort of, I guess, lets me fall back asleep at night. And what to pray for is first of all, that none of these incidents happen. Let me assure you, by the way, anytime a police officer discharges his firearm, that is the worst nightmare of any police officer. No police officer I've ever met wants to discharge their firearm. And I think there's some officers
Well, I
in the
bet
room.
you have met some, but they might not have told you that.
Maybe, but I don't know. I don't know what's in the heart of hearts, but I believe that knowing what happens to a police officer when he fires his weapon, they should be very reluctant to fire the weapon. I mean, listen.
I'm sure all of them, I'm just thinking that human nature.
And let me say this. Sometimes, you know, the incidents that people hear about are the controversial ones, right? The close calls. But believe me, there are incidents where police officers fire their weapons where you say, thank goodness, right? I mean, we just reviewed a case where there was a guy with a gun threatening his wife and raging, and he had just killed somebody. You know, I mean, there are times when the police officers, but even when a police officer shoots his weapon, in that kind of circumstance where you can read about it and say, that's not controversial at all, the process I just said, that whole process kicks in. Police officer usually has his gun taken away, goes on suspension or partial suspension, has to wait months for this process to play out, is the subject of a grand jury investigation for murder. It's a nightmare for the police officers. So I forget how we got there, but what I would ask you to pray for, first of all, is that we don't have these incidents simply don't happen. I don't know if God grants that kind of wish, but if they do, that people are willing to sit down and talk and have an understanding of the process.
Yeah.
Robert Rogers, Church of God in Christ. I appreciate the presentation, the core principles, and everything like that. My concern is that this is after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I want to know what your office is doing to prevent excessive force. I mean, how are you all being proactive in training officers, helping them in their multicultural understanding of people? Because it seems to me, by and large, it's people of color who are being killed and shot and what have you, like that. So how are you all being proactive in protesting excessive force?
One of the things that one of the many things we're in charge of at the Attorney General's office, I didn't even mention all these, beyond the county prosecutors, we are in charge of the medical examiners, the DNA collection. We have so many, but one of the most important things that we're in charge of is police training. We run the academy for state level officers, and we are in charge of the standards for police training across the state. And I can tell you that we train on use of force, we train on this policy, we train on cultural sensitivity, we train very importantly on, probably more importantly than a lot of this other stuff, mental health, right? Dealing with people in the streets who are mentally disturbed, mentally ill. We train on those around the clock for new recruits, for existing police officers. We put in place new curriculum on those areas within the last year or so, and the Police Training Commission is now pushing those policies out to all the academies across the state. So yeah, no, you're right. Look, this is all after the fact, and training is so crucial. We send millions and millions of dollars into training, and we're constantly updating our curriculum as the times dictate. Yes, sir.
Michael Van Allen, NAACP Chair of Criminal Justice. In light of trust.
Now, you're the chair of criminal justice?
For Morris County.
Okay, because what's the guy's name who does it for the state?
Melvin Morris.
Mel, I was gonna say, Mel, does Melvin know this? Okay, yeah.
In light of transparency and trust, how secretive is the evidence that prosecutors bring to the grand jury?
Very. The evidence that goes into the whole point of a grand jury is secrecy. And when we give these public statements, they do not include grand jury material. They include material, there's a fine distinction. If a police officer goes out and interviews a suspect, which will happen in all these cases, that information will be included in the public statement. If that suspect then testifies in the grand jury, that actual testimony will not be included. That is grand jury evidence that is under a lockbox. That's one of the core principles of our system, and it won't be compromised. I don't think we legally could compromise it. So whatever happens in that grand jury room will remain in a box. But we can still issue a public statement explaining what the investigation outside of that grand jury room found. Couple more? Yes, sir.
Jeff Norton with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Can you give us a sense, maybe to his question, about how training may have brought down the number of incidents, or if it's had any impact?
I don't know.
And
Yeah.
And also, second, just give us a sense, in the last 1, 2, 3 years,
Yeah.
what are the number of OIS and SRT
Sure.
incidents that you've investigated?
Sure. So I can start with SRT. There have been about 50 SRTs since 2012. So you're talking about a 3-year time frame. You know, that's about, how many months is that? About 36. So it's a little over 1 a month, meaning a use of force by a county or state level officer. By the way, keep in mind, missed shots count as SRT. If a police officer fires his weapon and misses, or hits and the person doesn't die, those all go into this process. So they're not all lethal. I don't know, I would say maybe 50% are lethal. But of those, look, a lot of them you'll never hear about because they're no-brainers, because you have someone who is obviously correcting you. We still review it, but you'll never hear about it, right? There's always going to be a consumer bias in what the media reports. The media doesn't report on all of these, or they'll have, the one we did yesterday was a no-brainer, and it was on NJ.com for 12 seconds, and that was that. In terms of county level or OISs, we don't review them all, remember. We only review the ones where the county prosecutor has decided this does not need to go into a grand jury. I would say that number is about the same as the number I gave you before. I would say about 1 a month of those, maybe 1 or 2 a month of those. But the county prosecutors do put a lot of these cases into a grand jury, and I know some counties have a standing policy that any fatal shooting automatically goes to a grand jury. I know Essex has that policy, I know Atlantic County has that policy. So, boy, if I had to ballpark it, I would say maybe 150 to 200 such incidents in the last 3 years, all through the entire state. And I guess you could look at that and say that's a remarkably low number, because there have probably been 1 million or several million police-citizen encounters in that time. Or you could look at it and say that's an awful lot of police uses of force. So,
This is a follow-up. I know one of the things we've been trying to do at a national level, maybe we could just start here in the county or in the state, is actually track the data.
Yeah.
And then make that a part of the public policy effort to say numbers are down.
yeah.
So I know we track criminal data, crime is down and crime is up. Be nice to track that data and be able to share it.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's, we are in the process of doing that in the state, and you're right. I mean, I know the Attorney General, Eric Holder, the United States Attorney General, said, I was shocked to learn that the FBI didn't track this. And I think they're working on that. They must be working on that. So, yeah, you're right. Couple others? Yes, sir.
There's been a use of force incident and someone has died.
Mm-hmm.
The grand jury process, the prosecutor role is to determine who you're representing during that grand jury
Who does who
process.
represent?
I'm sorry?
Who does who represent?
The prosecutor.
Prosecutor represents the prosecutor, the state of New Jersey.
In the grand jury process. So is your objective to determine that the officer did, in fact, abuse
No.
his use of force?
No. In a grand, I'm glad you asked that. The grand jury is different than a trial, right? A trial is adversarial. At a trial, the APs who try the cases, they're trying to convince a jury that the person who has been charged by a grand jury is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. In a grand jury, you're not on either side as a prosecutor. You go in there and you say, I'm here to present evidence in this case, and I'm gonna give you an indictment to vote on, whether you think there should be an indictment or not. But you are not on either side. Your job as the prosecutor is more of, you present the evidence to the grand jury. You present the evidence, good and bad, you present the evidence for and against indictment, and the grand jury makes the decision. But keep in mind that the bar is different in the grand jury. It's probable cause, but when you have a justification defense, we have to disprove that it was justified beyond reasonable fact. So it's sort of a high bar. I don't want to get too law schoolish on you, but the point is, the prosecutor in front of the grand jury represents the state of New Jersey and is not asking them, at the end of a jury address to a jury, will say, and you've heard the proof, ladies and gentlemen, against this defendant. That's the end of a trial. In a grand jury, you do no such thing. You say, you've now heard the evidence, I'll leave you with a draft of the indictment, you all will go ahead and vote on whether there should be an indictment or not. So it's not adversarial in that sense. Understand?
So in a grand jury process, a witness comes in to give testimony. Who asks the questions of the witness?
Yep.
The prosecutor does?
Yes.
Does the defense attorney have a chance to ask questions or
Yeah.
not? Or
No. All the questions go to the gray area of law about if someone who's being investigated, a police officer in this case, or just an ordinary civilian in another case, has a right to go into a grand jury. Generally, they do. Grand jury, I'm not sure it's, or any person being investigated, it does happen. They generally speaking have the right to go in and tell the grand jury their side of the story.
But the questions are generated by the prosecutor or by the grand jurors? Can they also ask
Both,
questions?
both. Yeah, grand jurors absolutely can raise their hands and. Oh, all right, one more, then chiefs of police are already going to be mad at me. Yes.
Someone may have asked this question, if they did. I heard you talk about, I'm thinking about training of officers. I heard you ask about, you mentioned cultural sensitivity. Cultural sensitivity training, I think about an awareness of the culture of the other person that I'm engaging with. When I think about anti-racism training or anti-bias training, I think of an awareness of how my own prejudice may affect my actions for better and for worse.
Right.
Is there both cultural sensitivity and anti-racism training, or only cultural sensitivity?
There's both, and cultural sensitivity. I think you described well. The implicit bias training, we'll call it. That's new, and we're working on. But on, hold on, think of the date. We just did this on October 8th. We hosted a session. It was co-sponsored by the NAACP, the Chiefs of Police, Chris Wagner, who just left to go to the event I'm going to, and the Attorney General's office. We co-sponsored a training on fair and impartial policing. And there was about 150 police chiefs. I think Prosecutor Knapp was there, I think?
Yes.
Yeah, Prosecutor Knapp was there. I think Tom, were you there?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Last Wednesday?
The one in Princeton.
Yeah.
Tom was there. There's about 150 members of law enforcement and about 50 to 75 members of the NAACP in the community. And the speaker was a guy who had been chief. He gave a day-long presentation on implicit biases, and it was fascinating. I mean, he showed social science and studies that showed that people have implicit biases, talked about the way those biases manifest themselves. So we're just starting on that. I thought that was a great first step. We're going to do follow-up sessions, but you're right to sort of identify two different layers that need to be addressed. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for your hospitality.